Sink the Bismarck held audiences breathless with its epic portrayal of war. But the very actors in the film themselves lived and died in tragedies no one could have foreseen. They lost their homelands, their freedom, the light of their lives, and in the end, they lost themselves in heartbreaking deaths. What really happened? Let us remember them and honor the legacies they left behind. Esmond Knight as Captain John Leach. At 54 years old, Esmond Pennington Knight appeared in the war film Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as Captain John Leach, the commander of HMS Prince of Wales. What made this role so fateful was the fact that nearly 20 years earlier, Knight himself had been aboard that very ship when it faced the battleship Bismarck in real life. To have an actor carry the living memory of survival into the role of a captain made his performance more haunting and authentic than anyone else could possibly achieve. Esmond Knight was born on May 4, 1906, in East Sheen, Surrey, England. But his life was marked by tragedy early on. In 1941, during the naval battle with the Bismarck, shell fragments tore through the area where he was standing, leaving him completely blind for 2 years. He permanently lost one eye, and the other remained severely impaired. From a rising actor, Knight was suddenly plunged into darkness. Those first 2 years after the accident were filled with helplessness and despair. He could not see the faces of his loved ones, could not walk alone, and his spirit sank into hopelessness. Though later treatment allowed him to recover partial sight, the damage never disappeared. Knight learned to perform half-blind, relying on memory and the guidance of colleagues. But behind the stage lights were sleepless nights, constant pain, and a soul haunted by trauma. On February 23, 1987, Esmond Knight died of a heart attack in London at the age of 80. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about 1.5 million USD, built from more than half a century of devotion to stage and screen. He is remembered not only as a talented artist, but also as a symbol of resilience. Michael Goodliffe as Captain Bannister. At 46 years old, Michael Goodliffe played Captain Bannister in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, a naval officer in the British command. With his intellectual look, calm demeanor, and dignified bearing, Goodliffe was often cast as doctors, lawyers, or military officers, characters representing authority and trust. Yet behind the steady gaze he carried on screen lay a life filled with haunting memories and unhealed tragedy. Michael Goodliffe was born on October 1, 1914, in Bebington, Cheshire, England. The first great tragedy of his life struck in 1940 when he fought at Dunkirk. Wounded in the leg, he fell into German hands and endured 5 years as a prisoner of war. Life in the camp was a mixture of hunger, disease, and endless despair. To make matters worse, back home he had been mistakenly declared dead, with newspapers even publishing his obituary. During that dark time, he clung to theater inside the prison, writing and performing plays to keep his spirit alive. But when the war ended, he returned with deep psychological scars, carrying memories of horror that never faded. After the war, Goodliffe found professional success, appearing in more than 100 roles, big and small, yet the trauma of the past and his depression clung to him. He turned to alcohol in an attempt to quiet his mind, but the bitter liquid only dragged him deeper into despair. By 1976, while rehearsing for the play Equus, his condition collapsed entirely, and he lost hope of ever finding peace of mind. On March 20, 1976, in a bleak afternoon at Atkinson Morley Hospital, Goodliffe threw himself from a fire escape staircase, ending his life in tragedy. He was 61 years old. He left behind his wife, Dorothy Margaret Tyndale, 3 children, and an estate worth about 800,000 USD. His tragic death not only shocked the British acting community, but also turned Goodliffe into a symbol of the tragic fate of a generation of talent forever haunted by the ghosts of war. Karl Stupanek as Admiral Günther Lütjens. Karl Stupanek played Admiral Günther Lütjens, the Nazi naval commander during the brutal sea battle in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, when he was 61 years old. With his cold, unyielding presence and commanding voice, he gave the character an aura of chilling authority. More than just a villain on screen, the role mirrored some of the struggles and inner conflicts of his own real life. Karl Stupanek was born on October 29, 1899, in Brno, then part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Instead of a peaceful childhood, he grew up amid the chaos of a Europe fractured by war and division. As a boy, he lived with constant insecurity, watching society collapse around him, his family struggling with poverty, and facing endless fears about an uncertain future. These harsh realities left him with the sense of being uprooted, stripped of stability. The trauma of loss in his early years left a permanent mark, so that even as an adult, whether on stage or in front of a camera, there was always a deep sadness in his eyes that no role could ever conceal. On December 25, 1980, Christmas Day, Karl Stupanek died of a heart attack in London at the age of 81. Passing away on such a day of peace only deepened the sorrow, a bitter irony for a man who had endured so many tragedies in his life. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $1 million USD, mostly from more than 100 international film roles. His life closed in loneliness, leaving behind the image of an exiled artist who spent his years haunted by the loss of his homeland, dying quietly, never having found again the peace he lost as a child. Kenneth Moore, as Captain Jonathan Shepherd. At 46 years old, Kenneth Gilbert Moore played Captain Jonathan Shepherd in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, a portrait of a firm, unflinching commander making life-and-death decisions. It was one of his key roles, remembered as a milestone in British cinema for its dramatic depiction of one of World War II's fiercest naval battles. On screen, he appeared strong and resolute, but behind the camera, his life was marked by turmoil. Kenneth Moore was born on September 20, 1914, in Gerrard's Cross, Buckinghamshire, England. While his career soared to great heights, his personal life was riddled with broken marriages. The man known for his cheerful, happy-go-lucky image on screen lived a private life full of bitterness. 3 marriages, 3 divorces, each leaving public scandals and scars that never healed. His second marriage ended in particular acrimony when he left his wife for actress Angela Douglas, 26 years younger, a decision that cost him friends, alienated his family, and angered the public. After the smiles and laughter on set, he returned home to cold silence, consumed by loneliness and regret. The brilliance of film stardom could not hide a man torn between love, guilt, and an emptiness that could never be filled. On July 12, 1982, Kenneth Moore died in London at the age of 67, after years of decline from Parkinson's disease. His net worth at death was estimated at about $5 million USD, largely from classic roles such as Reach for the Sky and A Night to Remember. The most heartbreaking memory recalled by friends was his final moment, when he still tried to smile and whispered, "When you're smiling," a desperate attempt to hold on to joy before the curtain of fate fell on his turbulent life. Dana Winter as Second Officer Ann Davis. At 29 years old, Dana Winter portrayed Second Officer Ann Davis in Sink the Bismarck, 1960. With her elegant beauty, sharp gaze, and calm demeanor, she was not only the sole female presence in the film, but also a symbol of courage amidst the storm of war. The role secured Dana Winter's place in the hearts of international audiences and established her as one of the most prominent actresses of the 1960s. Dana Winter was born on June 8, 1931, in Berlin, Germany. Yet her private life was filled with hardship, especially in marriage. In 1956, Winter married Hollywood lawyer Greg Bautzer, and it seemed she had found stability. But the glamour of Hollywood soon turned love into bitter battles behind the walls of their lavish mansion. They had one son together, but the marriage quickly collapsed under irreconcilable conflicts. The final years of their union became a heavy burden of property disputes, arguments over custody, and harsh words that wore her down. In 1981, the marriage ended in divorce, leaving Dana to walk away from Hollywood carrying emotional scars that never healed. Behind the proud smile of a star were silent tears the audience never saw. On May 5, 2011, Dana Winter died in Ojai, California, at the age of 79, after years of struggling with congestive heart failure. Her net worth at the time was estimated at about $3 million USD, built from a career spanning over 4 decades with classics such as Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The final heartbreaking image was her passing in quiet simplicity. According to her son, it was as if she just stepped off a bus. It was a simple yet tragic end for a woman who had once shone brightly, remembered as both proud and fragile, living a life caught between stardom and loneliness. Michael Hordern as Admiral Jack Tovey. Michael Murray Hordern was 49 years old when he played Admiral Jack Tovey in Sink the Bismarck, 1960. With a stern demeanor, commanding voice, and weathered face, he embodied a resolute admiral in the midst of a brutal sea battle. The role stood as one of his most important, highlighting both his artistic maturity and personal imprint on a historical portrayal. Michael Hordern was born on October 3, 1911, in Berkhamsted, Hertfordshire, England. Behind the brilliance of his stage and screen career, however, lay a life touched by loss. He had one marriage, to Grace Eveline Mortimer, which lasted more than 4 decades. She was his anchor, the only true haven in a busy and demanding life. But tragedy struck in 1986, when Grace died after a serious illness, leaving him alone in an empty house. After that devastating loss, Hordern lived in silence, weighed down by profound loneliness. Though he immersed himself in work, he never overcame the void she left behind. Her death seemed to take the last part of his spirit, turning his final years into a heavy and shadowed existence. On May 2, 1995, Michael Hordern died in Oxford, England, at the age of 83, after battling chronic kidney disease for many years. His net worth at death was estimated at about $4 million USD, earned from more than 140 film and television roles, along with countless stage and radio works. The most touching images that remain in the memory of audiences are his deep, resonant voice in Paddington Bear and his haunting portrayal of Jacob Marley in Scrooge, 1951, reminders that, even in death, the voice and artistic legacy of Michael Hordern continue to live on in the hearts of generations. Lawrence Naysmith as First Sea Lord. At 52 years old, Lawrence Naysmith appeared in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as the First Sea Lord, the head of the Royal Navy. With his stern face, authoritative presence, and real-life military experience, he brought the character vividly to life, convincing audiences of a commander's strength and resolve. The role also marked a mature period in his career, when Naysmith's name had already become synonymous with powerful and steadfast figures. Lawrence Naysmith was born on December 14, 1908, in Thames Ditton, Surrey, England. Yet behind the stage lights was a marriage story steeped in loss. Naysmith married Christine Baca in 1939, a love that seemed unbreakable through war and the ups and downs of his career. She was not only his partner in life, but also his anchor, the one who helped him withstand the solitude of an actor's life and the demands of difficult roles. But in 1985, Christine died after a serious illness, leaving him in unspeakable grief. Her passing tore down the last barrier protecting his heart. In his final years, he withdrew into loneliness, leaving England, where every street reminded him of her, to live with his son in Australia. It was not a journey of peace, but an escape from the pain that gnawed at him until the end. On June 5, 1992, Lawrence Naysmith died in Southport, Queensland, Australia, at the age of 83, after years of declining health due to heart disease. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $2 million, earned mainly from major roles in films such as Diamonds Are Forever and A Night to Remember. The most haunting image he left behind was of an actor who once embodied the most powerful figures on screen, yet in the end died quietly in a foreign land, carrying an unending grief for his late wife, a life both brilliant and tragic. Maurice Denim as Commander Richards. At 51 years old, Maurice Denim appeared in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as Commander Richards, a devoted and decisive naval officer in the hunt for the German battleship. His performance portrayed a calm yet forceful presence, reflecting the seriousness and depth he brought to every character. It was a time when Denim was at the height of his career, already a familiar face in British film, stage, and radio. Maurice Denim was born on December 23, 1909, in Beckenham, Kent, England. Away from the stage lights, however, he carried a sorrow that no professional success could erase, a tragedy within his family. He married Margaret Dunn in 1936, and together they had 3 children, appearing to have built a lasting happiness. But disaster struck when their daughter Virginia died in a sudden accident, leaving a wound in Denim's heart that never healed. He once confided to friends that this loss was a devastating blow, one that made every laugh on set and every applause in the theater feel distant and hollow. He threw himself into work, recording meticulous notes on every role as if to fill the void. But the more he worked, the more aware he became of the loneliness and emptiness at home. The loss of his child cast a quiet shadow over the rest of his life, one that audiences never truly saw. On July 24, 2002, Maurice Denim died at Denville Hall, London, at the age of 92, of natural causes. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $1.8 million, the result of nearly 7 decades of relentless dedication to stage, film, and radio. The image that lingers most poignantly is of a devoted artist whose voice and face became familiar to generations of audiences, but who, deep down, was also a grieving father forever marked by loss, a life both great and profoundly tragic. Jack Guillim, as Commodore Wilfred Patterson. Jack William Frederick Guillim appeared in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as Commodore Wilfred Patterson, a character representing the discipline and strength of the Royal Navy when he was 51 years old. With his tall frame, stern features, and commanding presence, he convinced audiences that he was a real officer rather than just an actor playing a role. This was the period when Guillim had firmly established himself as a familiar face in war films and epics. Jack Guillim was born on December 15, 1909, in London, England. His private life, however, was harsh and filled with sorrow, particularly in marriage. In 1943, he married Peggy Ballard, who stood by him during the difficult post-war years and gave him 2 children. But their happiness was torn apart in 1958 when Peggy died, leaving him alone to shoulder the burden of family life. The sudden loss devastated Guillim, who had to play the roles of both father and mother, appearing strong for his children while privately carrying unbearable grief. Though he later remarried Olivia Selby and had another child, the wound left by the death of his first wife never healed, casting a quiet shadow over even his most brilliant years on stage and screen. On July 2, 2001, Jack Guillim died in Los Angeles, U.S., at the age of 91, after years of declining health. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $1.5 million, largely from a decades-long acting career with masterpieces such as Lawrence of Arabia, Patton, and Clash of the Titans. The lasting image in the public memory is of an actor with the bearing of a commander, yet deep inside, a man who spent his life haunted by the memory of his lost wife, a tragedy that made his journey both heroic and heartbreaking. Geoffrey Keane as Assistant Chief of Naval Staff. At 44 years old, Geoffrey Ian Keane appeared in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as the Assistant Chief of Naval Staff, a key figure in the Royal Navy Command. With his stern face and cold, precise acting style, Keane perfectly portrayed a man carrying heavy responsibility during moments of life and death. The role not only showcased his talent, but also paved the way for him to become a familiar figure in many famous films, particularly the James Bond series. Geoffrey Keane was born on August 21, 1916, in Wallingford, Oxfordshire, England. His private life, however, was full of emotional upheavals that denied him lasting peace of mind. He married 3 times, first to actress Hazel Terry, then to Madeline Howell, but both marriages ended in bitter divorce. The separations left him lonely and eroded his faith in family happiness. It seemed those wounds would haunt him forever, until he met Doris Groves, the woman who finally gave him a true home. They shared nearly 3 decades together, but fate struck cruelly again. In 1989, Doris died, leaving Keane to face his old age alone. Behind the screen's spotlight, he was a man who had repeatedly watched happiness slip from his grasp, leaving a void that could never be filled. On November 3, 2005, Geoffrey Keane died at Denville Hall, London, at the age of 89. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $3.5 million USD, earned from more than 100 films, including 6 appearances as Sir Frederick Grey, the Minister of Defense, in the James Bond series. The image that remains with audiences is that of an actor inseparable from powerful roles, but behind the curtain was a quiet man burdened with the pain of broken marriages and the loneliness that followed him until his final days. Mark Dagnum as Captain Lobin-Mond. At 51 years old, Cuthbert Mark Dagnum appeared in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as Captain Lobin-Mond, a stern and decisive naval officer. With his grave demeanor and weighty delivery, he convinced audiences they were watching a man who had truly come from the battlefield. The film was not only a milestone in Dagnum's career, but also cemented his place among a generation of actors often associated with figures of authority and heavy responsibility. Mark Dagnum was born on March 20, 1909, in London, England. Yet behind a brilliant career, his married life was marked by fractures and pain. He went through 3 marriages, first to Georgia McKinnon, then to Helen Christie, but both ended in divorce. The 2 failed unions left deep emotional scars, burdening him with insecurity and the haunting sense that family happiness was too fragile to last. It was only when he married Virginia Kirby, his 3rd wife, that Dagnum found some peace. Yet the ghosts of the past still lingered. After every round of applause, he returned to his private room carrying the loneliness of a man who had too often watched love slip from his grasp. On September 29, 1989, Mark Dagnum died of heart disease in London, England, at the age of 80. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $1.2 million USD, mostly from his illustrious stage career and unforgettable film roles. But what lingers most painfully in memory is not only the loss of a talented artist, but also the image of a man who lived a life filled with public acclaim while his heart carried private wounds and silent sorrow. Carl Mner as Captain Ernst Lindemann. At 39 years old, Carl Martin Rudolf Mner portrayed Captain Ernst Lindemann in Sink the Bismarck, 1960. With his stern appearance and commanding aura, he gave a powerful performance as the courageous captain of the battleship Bismarck. The role solidified his international standing after his breakthrough in the classic heist film Riffify, 1955. Carl Mner was born on August 11, 1921, in Vienna, Austria. But behind the acclaim, he endured a painful struggle with Parkinson's disease. After retiring from film in 1976, he hoped for peaceful years devoted to painting and family life. Instead, the cruel illness struck, slowly stripping away his physical freedom, rendering the hands once familiar with brushes, and the memories once alive before the camera useless. The man who once commanded a naval fleet on screen now found himself powerless in real life, dependent on his wife, Wilma Langhammer, whom he married in 1978, to help him endure each day. The tension between his glorious past and harsh present turned his final years into bitter ones, as the admiration of audiences survived only in memory. On January 14, 2005, Carl Mner died in McAllen, Texas, U.S., at the age of 83. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about $2 million USD, accumulated from over 40 films and his paintings, which were exhibited around the world. The image that remains most poignant is of an artist who once shone brilliantly on screen but ended his days in silence, succumbing to the shadows of a cruel disease in a foreign land. Jack Watling, as signals officer. At 37 years old, Jack Stanley Watling appeared in Sink the Bismarck, 1960, as the signals officer, a communications officer who played a crucial role in relaying orders during the most tense moments of battle. Though only one link in the vast machinery of the Navy, the character highlighted the importance of every individual in a life-or-death situation, and Watling, with his authentic and disciplined performance, captured that significance perfectly. Jack Watling was born on January 13, 1923, in Chingford, Essex, England. He had a marriage that seemed happy, but was not without challenges. In 1947, he married Patricia Hicks, and they remained together until the end of his life, raising 5 children. Among them was Deborah Watling, who became famous for her role in Doctor Who. But the success of his children also meant that the family constantly faced the harsh pressures of the spotlight. At times, his own career stalled, and the financial strain combined with the responsibility of raising a large family left Watling exhausted both mentally and physically. His later years became even more tragic when he was diagnosed with cancer, forcing him to endure the illness quietly. He tried to appear calm before his family, but inside he bore a world of pain that only he himself could carry. On May 22, 2001, Jack Watling died in Chelmsford, Essex, England, at the age of 78, after a long and losing battle with cancer. At the time of his death, his net worth was estimated at about 1.5 million USD, earned from a career that spanned more than 6 decades across stage, film, and television. What audiences remember most is not only his dedication as an actor, but also as a man who silently carried the weight of family and illness, leaving the world quietly, his passing one of sorrow and deep regret. Behind the legend of Sink the Bismarck lie the lives of artists swallowed by fate and tragedy. They are gone, yet their legacies and their pain remain with time. Which story haunts you the most? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe to discover more tragic stories hidden behind the silver screen.